Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast with me, your host, Mike Campbell. Today I'm thrilled to bring you another wonderful guest by the name of Michael Gay. You're going to hear all about him in this podcast. He's someone who I have met in person. I was very fortunate to meet. He's a good friend of a friend of mine, Traver Boehm. Traver introduced me to him and we met very briefly when I was in Hawaii last year with Traver. But we didn't really get to connect because we kind of ended up going on this hectic hike that no one was really expecting it to be so hectic. And I had Kaya in the front pack and it was slippery as all buggery and it was very treacherous. And I was quite focused on the survival of my daughter with a canyon below us, all this kind of stuff. So it was beautiful to connect with Michael for real. In depth in this conversation, and we learned so much about him as a therapist, growing up in a very strict Christian upbringing and then kind of having these awakenings, as he's called it, where he's like, this mode doesn't really fit. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, I've got bigger questions about life and humanity and who we are. And the journey that he went on, university, college, becoming a therapist, getting into this thing called wilderness therapy, which we'll talk about in this podcast, his journey into men's work and exploring the work of myth. We kind of geek out on Iron John and Robert Bly for a little bit because Michael had the privilege of actually spending time with this man. If you don't know who that is, he's someone who's pretty dope when it comes to mythology and understanding masculinity, and did a lot of remarkable early work distilling so much mythology and storytelling and imagery from across the globe throughout human history. This book, Iron John, I highly recommend it. We'll put it in the show notes where you can get it. And where that lands him now as a man, as a therapist, working with other men, a beautiful conversation, a wonderful soul. I think you'll get that when you listen to this conversation with Michael. An absolute joy to have him on the show. As always, I trust that you get something from this. Remember to do me and other men a solid by passing this episode on to a man that you think would benefit from it, would enjoy it. It helps us get more ears and eyes in front of this show and helps us grow it. That's how the show can grow. So, with all of that said, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, great to have you here. I'm Mike. Enjoy the show. Michael Gay, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast. It is a privilege to finally get you here. We've had a few stop-starts, but we couldn't quite make it work, so it's awesome to have you here.
Thanks so much. It's a privilege to be here, man.
So I'm super excited to chat with you. We've had the opportunity to meet very briefly when we kind of crossed paths on a quite interesting and entertaining walk/hike in Hawaii late last year through, obviously mutual friends. And I've heard so much about you as well from many people, especially Traver. And some of the people listening to this might know a little bit about you. Some might know nothing about you. So where I want to come in is, to get a little bit of your story perhaps. But the question I want to ask is, I suppose it's specific, but it's also very vague. You can take it wherever the hell you want. You ready?
I'm ready.
Who is Michael Gay?
Michael Gay is a man that woke up in the southern United States of America and was quite conditioned to exist in that culture and society and spiritual traditions, and started to have an intense process of waking and paradigm shifting, consciousness shifting, reorientation to what was real and what was important in life, and became deeply absorbed in trying to understand how best we could be here on this planet and what it really means to be together and what are the bigger stories that we're really a part of, and how come more of us don't deeply long to be a part of a bigger narrative that goes all the way to the core of us. Why do we really accept the narratives of who we are and what we are given to us, and how could we have a bit of a renaissance of waking up deeper parts of our nature?
Interesting. And this waking up, when was this for you?
It's happened in multiple stages, but it arrived, its first iteration was as a teenager. It was just almost overnight. It was just a shattering of an identity. It was a part of a very conservative Christian family in the South, and just all of a sudden, that paradigm didn't explain everything anymore. And and was quite limited in helping me answer the bigger questions that were in my heart and in my soul. And I didn't have a lot of places to go to learn more or ask more. My family couldn't meet me there.
Did
Therapists
you
couldn't meet me there.
attempt to
Oh
explore it
yeah,
with
yeah,
them?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I knew. I mean, it's strange, even at that age, and it wasn't. This is kind of, we're that generation that it was just before this became really a thing. I was like, I have a spiritual problem. I have like a spiritual conundrum I'm in, and everybody's like, "What the hell do you mean?"
This is us. We're in this box over here. Why should there be a conundrum?
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
how it works.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah. And so what did you do with it?
it was just like, mostly it was imploding. It was there's nowhere to go. So there was a lot of prayer involved, and there was a lot of going to the places, the outlets that I had available to me, which were psychotherapy, and to the pastors of the churches that I was involved in, and to teachers at my school, and to my grandparents, anyone that I thought had some like weight and substance to them. I wanted to ask like really big questions. So I went to the people that kind of supposedly were the big question holders in our culture, like the
Yeah.
priests and the therapists, and was deeply unmet. And so I think
Okay.
that if there really is that, be who you wish, or who you really needed when you were younger, like that's kind of the path that I went on, was being able to speak to those things and feel those things as an adult.
Deeply unmet. That's a quite a powerful statement, and I suppose state to be in. Was
Yeah.
that a blanket, like you spoke about therapists? So was that something that you seeked out? Did your family support you seeing therapists? Were they in that kind of
They
same box,
did.
let's call it?
They weren't into therapy at all, but they supported me. They were
Yeah.
just like, I don't know what he needs, but we'll do this because the school counselor said send him to somebody that's a professional.
Right.
And so, we went to those folks, and gosh, it was an awful experience.
Oh,
Went to so
really?
many different people. Yeah, it was terrible. And I mean, I became a therapist now, so it's strange that that's the path I chose, but I saw a lot of really bad ones. Yeah.
And I mean, without obviously going into specifics, but why do you think that
Sure.
was? Because this is clearly part of the, I felt deeply unmet.
Yeah. Why did they come up so short?
Hmm.
Is that the question? Or like, why did
Yeah.
I pursue that?
No, why did it, in your view, did they come so short? And,
I
you
think
still feel,
they were really still bound inside the cultural narratives of like
yeah.
what a human is and what's real. And so someone that's entertaining those questions, it's like really big cosmic questions. Um, all they could see was my depression, and they weren't wrong. I was depressed,
Mm,
but uh, Western psychotherapeutic ways of working with depression that are caused by like a spiritual existential crisis aren't that
mm,
effective. You don't medicate
yeah.
someone, you don't do cognitive behavioral therapy for someone who's really struggling with the deeper questions in life. Like they need some initiations, they need to be around people that really struggle with this stuff. And so just unfortunately, they didn't. I guess they had never really wrestled with that stuff and been consumed by those yearnings or strange rumblings in the soul.
Yeah. And so am I correct in assuming there that they then kind of tended to try and address this symptom that they saw, which is depression, and
Oh yeah,
this big disconnect of like, yeah, but of course,
yeah,
because I have these questions and no one's
yeah,
addressing these.
yeah, yeah. It was if I were to try to describe it, how it truly felt to me was that a spiritual soul story of like what we are and what we're doing here was as essential as oxygen or food or water.
Mm,
And on a deep level, I did not know how to be without something. So when Christianity
mm,
sort of started to crumble, I went into mystic Christianity to try to hang on, and that itself dissolved also. I just, how it felt to me as a being was just like, oh my God, I'm without food or water. Like I didn't,
mm,
and it was a
mm,
panic. Like
yeah.
I didn't have a grounded mind to explore these big questions. It was a panicked soul
Mm,
with no clear remedy, you know?
yeah. And you're still a teenager at this point?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
continued into college and
Yeah. So
working.
what happens next on this journey? You said, these kind of awakenings, there was perhaps different iterations, but that that feels like a very kind of, I'm getting an image of like the ground crumbling away. There's nothing solid to
100%.
stand on.
Yeah, 100%. What happens is starting to like fail in school, difficulty like focusing on issues. I was like a very gifted kid academically, but just couldn't think about math or Spanish
What's the
class.
point?
I was like, yeah, it's like, what are we? Like, you don't understand. What's a human being? How come nobody else is asking these questions? It doesn't bother anybody else. It doesn't burn deeply in anybody else. You don't feel strange without having a home for your soul in this world. And so it was just sort of like trying to make school, that was the only acceptable outlet for me to explore. I could take classes in philosophy and religion and psychology and sociology. So I had to like, that was the only socially acceptable way to search. I didn't have anyone in my world being like, go on a vision quest or,
So
read this,
yeah. And I think we're getting little clues perhaps in there into what you've learned and where you are now. But when did you start to perhaps, get some solid ground underneath your feet? What was that process like?
I got very lucky and started doing wilderness therapy work with
Okay.
teenagers and young adults. I got a psychology undergrad degree, and
Right. So you went through your entire college.
I did. Yeah, I went through your
in a
entire
somewhat
just
of a similar
stumbling.
state, but learning.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Not very pretty, but meeting really great friends and people and having meaningful experiences and developing a worldview and a value system. And then I was going to be a hermit to try to just read and figure out how to change the world. And ended up doing wilderness therapy. And so it was being
as a participant or as in
no, as a sort of a guide. Yeah, as a facilitator. Cool. Yeah.
Please talk us through that. What
well,
how did you find your way to that? And then please take us through wilderness therapy 101.
Synchronicity, man. Synchronicity. I had decided to go work at a hunting camp in Wyoming and take care of horses and cabins and just read and isolate and stay in touch with old professors.
And how old at this point? Like early 20s?
22. Yeah, 22, 23, somewhere in there. And was at a going away party and was talking to a friend of a friend who was like, oh, you like psychology, you want to be of service and work with people, you love outdoor wilderness stuff. How about wilderness therapy? And there just happened to be a program 20 miles from a place where my parents had a small little cabin in the mountains of the Southern Appalachians. So it's like, looking back on it, it's a crazy synchronicity. Like, it's a land I was familiar with that I had grown up in, and a really great program. There's a lot of bad wilderness therapy programs, but this was a wonderful one. And I got to work there for years and live outside 200 days a year and lead therapeutic groups for teenagers and try to let the wild teach us how to live with each other. And so that was like the first iteration. So it was like being needed, being depended on. So I wasn't lost in my own head, and I wasn't, other people were in need. So my own stuff wasn't as big of a deal.
Yeah, interesting. So, okay, I'll flag that. I'm interested to come back to that. So then can you talk us through, what's going on during wilderness therapy? There's some really bad ones, as you said. You ended up with something that's very powerful for others and you. Can you talk us through what that looks like for someone who's never heard of perhaps that before? Wilderness
programs it's a place for people that really, some people get sent there and they don't need to be there. It's like they got caught smoking pot and their parents freaked out and were like, your life is going in the can and we need to make sure you're on the straight and narrow. But, the majority of people had severe addiction issues, like had been kicked out of multiple schools, like couldn't function in school themselves in any shape or form, just like really intense depression or addiction issues. And so they would come to us for 8 to 15 weeks.
Right.
And they would live in a group of 8 to 15 kids, and usually around like 10. And there would be 4 staff to 10 kids, and you live out in the woods, primitively cooking on fires and doing group process work every day, and also trying to have fun while you're out there. And it's a rolling admission, and it really was extraordinary when those places are done well. 2 months of that kind of work is roughly the equivalent of a year at some sort of inpatient place.
Mm.
Like it's so intensive, and it's
Yeah, I can imagine.
there's
All
such a
consuming,
great positive
absorbing.
culture. Yeah. And so it's overseen by therapists and really skilled ones in the program I was in. And so I got lucky. There was a culture of mentorship and
Okay.
learning, and which I had never really experienced before. So I got to
Right.
grow in my own skills, practice my own leadership skills, and
Meaning
um,
that you were also being mentored.
yeah, I was being mentored by the guides that were further along than I was, that had been working
Mm.
for longer than me. Here's how to lead a group. Here's how to de-escalate a conflict. Here's how to really meet a kid that's struggling. Here's how to not emotionally rescue, but deeply care about them and work with them and be what they need. Um, and the therapist would mentor us as well. And they wouldn't hesitate to take time. Like, here's what I see you need to work on. Here's how you could have done this better. This is what you're doing great. These are your strengths and your assets. And so it's a culture of mentorship that I never
Mm.
experienced before. Yeah.
And how did you land in amongst this? You know, as you said, there's the being of service and like, oh, okay, so this is great because my stuff, I mean, this might not have been a conscious thought, please let us know. My stuff just got a backseat a little bit because I get to be of service and, you know, develop my skills and all this. And also,
Mhm.
oh, I'm being guided and mentored in this other way. Where did Michael Gay kind of start landing in amongst that?
Well, it was very apparent to me that my own inner struggles was keeping me from being of service.
Mm.
And that's kind of like one of the guiding values that I had. Like, why aren't we taking better care of each other?
Mm.
And why aren't we creating a healthier culture? Um, and this was a way that I got to work with in a microcosm, creating healthy culture. You
Mm.
really got to recreate a microcosm of the world in your small group. Like, how do you treat each other? How do you communicate? How do you have fun? How do you support each other through hard shit? Um, and so you got to be the architect of a healthier culture. And so that was, even though I didn't have access to the bigger questions, there was something about human relationship and healing
Mm.
together and navigating brokenheartedness together, that there was meaning in that, despite like a larger context of like, what really are we as beings? You know, are we souls? Are we consciousness? Are we material things? Like, is this a simulation? Like, what is it? You know, like um, all those questions uh, uh, got the back seat because human contact and healing together was visceral and palpable. You feel it in
Mm.
your body. I felt it in my body, and it was the nexus of a lot of things I was good at: being outside, wilderness living skills, um, uh, mentorship, and uh, counseling pieces. And so it was a crossroads of a lot of things, that of my identity. So
Mm.
that's kind of how I fell in, and quickly became like a mentor to other new guides, and like a leader in the program. And I ended up doing that stuff for 6 years,
Right.
which is a lot longer than most people do it.
Yeah, man, I can imagine some probably very interesting, challenging, no doubt, stories and
Oh yeah.
situations from times out there. You know, were there times where you felt like extremely stretched and, you know, like questioning of self in that role?
Oh, of course, of course. The hardest part was being in the face of genuine suffering and not knowing what to do.
Mm.
Like, I can feel the pain in this person's heart, and I have no idea the right thing to say or do.
Mm.
And that was the hardest part. And also just hearing the pain that these folks had been through.
Mm.
You know, it's not like when you're working with kids that are struggling, it usually has something to do with the parents. Not
Mm.
always by any means, but to look at the families they were coming from, it was heartbreaking.
Mm.
The amount of like sexual trauma that these young girls had been through, how common it was in all of them. Things that I didn't really know, just my naive upbringing. They're just heartbreaking things all the time. Like what suffering does to a person, how it closes people in on themselves, and how they cope with that kind of pain through self-medication or self-harm or isolation or addiction, like whatever it is. So
Mm.
just being in the pain of it all and not knowing how to make the pain right, not knowing how
Mm.
to really help the heart and the soul of that person and the mind find ground and home and peace and strength. Because I was young too. I wasn't that much older than them. I
Yeah.
was in my own struggling place, at the same time and just before. So sometimes it felt like it was just excruciating to not know how to help better. It was like being in the emergency room. It's like, I don't know how to do surgery, but these people need surgery. So it was having to learn with this feeling that like my lack of knowledge, it's not necessarily my fault, but because I don't know something, other people are suffering. If I knew more, they would suffer less. So it was a big drive for me to learn as much as I could, as quick as I could. Because
Yeah.
if
So
I
then,
did, then I could
no,
help
way you go.
better. I was just more
Yeah.
effective at being a guide,
Yeah.
if I
Yeah.
learned more. So it made me dive into my own learning.
And because, you know, what I hear in that is perhaps like a spectrum, you know, like some very challenging extreme things as you see the depth of suffering for some people. But I also hear something quite common in what you're sharing as well, which like personally, but you know, like a lot of men that I work with, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, the challenge in sitting with someone else's pain and discomfort. And then of course, what pain and discomfort that might bring up for ourselves, and just feeling like, you know what, let's fix this and take it away in the only perhaps way that I know. So how does one actually start to sit with others' suffering and discomfort?
I guess the first lesson in that was that what's needed is connection. That if I try to fix it, or if I try to solve it, or if I try to rescue or distract or deflect, sometimes deflection and distraction is perfect and just what the doctor ordered, but it's about contact and connection. The connection is sort of the medicine to a large degree. And I don't have to know what to do to be connected to somebody. Everyone has in them the capacity to deeply connect and be with like a certain quality of presence. And if I can show up from that place, even when I don't know what to do or how to really help them, I can still have faith that connection is what we've all been missing in our lives. And in itself is maybe the most important thing. That if we can work with our own inability to connect, work with someone's ability to learn to connect, there's skills and techniques and insights and angles that are very helpful, but deep connection is usually one of the worst parts of the suffering. And so like to not be able to connect. And so that was the piece of like, I don't always have to know what to do, but I can learn how to be.
Can you say that again for us?
Yeah, I don't always have to know what to do, but I can learn how to be.
Yeah, I think that certainly lands for me. And you know, even to the question, so many of the men that I work with, there's this drive to what do I got to do, and we often miss that there's so much in the being, and we can always learn how to be. I love that. And so then I'm interested to kind of poke. You know, you've got someone listening here who's like, okay, yeah, I get into these challenges with my partner and she'll be sharing something and I'm like, what do I do with this? Okay, I'm hearing from this dude Michael, it sounds great. I can't take her out into the wilderness for 8 weeks, but
sure,
connection. All right, so my instinct, my pattern, my history is, you know, I got a hammer, I'm just going to hit that nail with some solutions. So now I'm hearing, okay, connection. All right. Well, in the face of someone's discomfort, what might be some avenues that I can start stepping towards, do you think?
Sure. The transfer I would make is like from the wilderness to like someone that's a listener. When I was working with these kids, we'd be setting up camp, for example. I'm teaching a kid from inner city New York to set up a tarp to sleep under. They've never done anything,
That'd be wild
like
in the
that in their
South.
life, you know how to poop in the woods, whatever it is.
Is this a TV show? This feels like this should also be a
they
TV show.
They did make one, actually. They did make a reality show out of it, which is strange. But it's not so much I'm teaching a kid and not. It's a quality of the way I'm being with the kid while I'm teaching them to do it. There's a lightness in me. There's a sincerity in me. There's a presence in me while I'm doing it. They matter. I'm there. I'm saying so much to them energetically. And we forget as humans how much of our communication and exchange between each other is energetic. It's something that's happening outside of the doing. That's the being part. And if you don't know the energy that you're telegraphing or that's landing inside your body, then you're missing 85% of the human realm. And the words are just a way to carry energy. The actions are just a way to carry energy. And so I think men forget that a bunch. You know, men can get very good at communicating. They can learn NVC and be assertive in communication, but the energetic quality of presence isn't there as much. And so much of like the masculine tone of what presence is certain, like, I'm the mountain and I am here unwaveringly, and you know, it's different than that. There's an energy that where you can create openings and drop your partner into something without words. It's what's going on inside your body, and we feel this with each other. It can agitate us or it can relax us. It can make us feel safe or make us feel unsafe. So the way it translates to your life or a listener's life is are you aware of your energy? And this is kind of like become my life passion, is the different ways we can teach men energetic fluency and awareness, whether that's working with horses or in group work or whatever it may be. So if you're with your partner, it comes down to the energy that's coming out of your body and going into theirs. And likewise, what does their energy going into your body do? You know, does it spin you out? Does it go straight into the ground? Does it connect you more to your core? Does it open up compassion? Do you know where to have the strong boundaries? It's all energetic work.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of examples where, you know, perhaps it's a bit more obvious that your energy is being impacted by someone else's energy. You know, someone comes into a room and they're wild and furious, or they've had a bad day, and like it's very easy often to pick up that energy. And then, you know, vice versa, different people who feel very soft and calming. I'm going straight to that example of you know, being with this kid from New York, you know, and putting the tent up and so on. There's an intentionality there, and this word presence, you know, is very obvious. I'm interested to ask, so can you teach someone presence?
Yeah, I think you can. And like that's got so many different ways of doing it. Some people really just have the karma of coming in and they just are that way from the time they're babies. They really are. But for men especially, something we say about men all the time, men really need modeling. A lot of modeling, more than women. And so it is like an energetic transfer from a person into another, one body into another. And so if you get around certain people that have it, it will change you. And if you get in communities of people that do it, it'll change you. And we need both. We need individuals and communities that have these qualities, and it changes us over time, for sure. We get drawn into the coherence with each other.
Yeah, I like that. And you know, there's two quite simple words there as well. Over time, you know, there's an invitation to patience in that as well. You know, just give me the book, as you said. Like, I can have these ideas like the mountain and all this kind of stuff, you know, intellectually, but also this is actually about landing in your body, and that's the embodiment, which takes time.
Right. There's a very real split that we don't acknowledge as much as we should culturally, between awareness and mind, and then the energetic places where no amount of awareness is going to shift it, or you know, or it shifts it slowly. And there's other tools that are better for training the deeper energetic self than just mindfulness. And so, in fact, I think mindfulness as I don't know, this is a bold thing to say, mindfulness as a movement can be a defense against just like the deeper energetic realms. It is slow. It is helpful. It's a tool, but it's not a way of life in and of itself. There's ways to take it deeper. And so men have a little bit of a hard setup archetypally. I really do buy into this. Like if we're talking about the four archetypes, the warrior, lover, magician, and king, the warrior, magician, and king are all doing archetypes. The lover is the only being archetype. So we're a little bit like heavy on the doing stuff archetypally as men. So it's hard to switch into that being in that energetic stuff if it's not as natural to you.
Yeah, not as natural, and perhaps, your environment and heavy influences have also kind of doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on that, right? And we've praised it and rewarded it and glorified it, and all of a sudden my identity is anything in this mode over here, or even, the perhaps, a version of the lover is actually all doing anyway, right? It's kind of the shadow form.
Right, for sure.
So let's explore into this, because I have, I think, an awareness when it comes to, like looking at the archetypal side of things, and certainly looking at like, myth, that I believe you, on some level, maybe I'm just going to throw this term out there and you can see what's accurate, like came into contact, had some interaction with Robert Bly. Is that correct?
Yeah, all those old guys: Robert Bly, Robert Moore, Malidoma Somé, John Lee, who's still living. He's and Martin Shaw, as he was starting to, he transitioned out of men's work, but it was it's a little bit of a wild story. I've told it before on a podcast, but basically I had a very close friend in college who burned with the same kind of existential longings, and he gave me Robert Bly's book, and he's like, hey, you got to read this book. Yeah. And so I was in the middle of reading Iron John.
Right.
And he ended up.
And this is at college, right? So 20 or something like this.
Yeah. So at 21, and he ended up taking his own life. And it was at his memorial service. An older gentleman saw me reading the book and invited me to that first men's conference, which was the last few years that Robert he ended up struggling with some Alzheimer's dementia. And so the last couple of years where he was really teaching. So it was him and Robert Moore and Malidoma sometimes, and John Lee was all in Mentone. It was the Mentone Men's Conference. Right. And then I went to work with him in Minnesota the last years that he was there in 2009.
With Robert.
Yeah. Right. By that time he had started to slip in 2009, in and out. But yeah, so I got to be with them, and yeah.
So you were like physically reading the book. At the memorial.
And a guy saw me reading it. I mean, you couldn't make it up if it was a movie. It was just like, you need to come and be with me with these guys. So they came, and I cooked in the kitchen to pay my way. I didn't have like the money to pay for it. And so I cooked in the kitchen to attend. And then one year I read a poem at an open mic, and they made me read it to Robert, and he read it to everybody. So I have this like audio recording of me reading one of my first poems to Robert, reading my poem to everybody, and then he offered to pay for me to come the next year. It was really rad.
Wow. So I'm very interested, and I've kind of referenced, books like Iron John on the podcast before, but also know that that's a book, and books like it that, many guys have not even heard of nor come across. And I'm, thinking back to my own experience, like rereading it at the moment, and the first time I read it, and then trying to be in the place of a 21-year-old sitting with that, and not just like, who I was at 21, like whatever, what's this? And yeah, as you said, that kind of existential fire.
Yeah.
How was your experience reading a book like that? How was that kind of, landing for you?
Well, for me, honestly, it worked. I was ready for that kind of a book, and
sounds like it.
I reread it a couple of times, and I always get more from it every time I read it. Like as I age, and I remember him writing in there, like, you'll realize this stuff around the time you're 40. I was like, damn it, but I want to realize it now. I don't want to wait 15 years to be ripe enough for this stuff. Like, where's the real shit? And like, I remember not wanting to have that kind of patience, but there just is a kind of awareness and orientation that you can't get without time. And but it did change my life. It changed everything. It set me on the trajectory of wilderness therapy, of everything, of myth, of poetry, of Persian poetry, of writing. It changed everything to be in that book, and to be in Robert Moore and Robert Bly's presence. It was a life-changing thing. There really is a transmission when you see that embodied. You can't unfeel that. I never had met a person. It was reality bending to know what's possible for a man to be. I didn't know it was possible for a man to be that, what he was.
And can you describe that for us in your own words, of course?
Sure. Incredibly powerful and brilliant and life-giving. Like all of his gifts of intellect and creativity and humor gave life. They weren't just brilliance for the sake of brilliance or funniness for the sake of funniness. They gave life. They gave everything roots in the room. They gave you something to hold on to as a soul, and he gave you something for every piece of you to hold on to. And he would also give you stuff that on the other side, like you couldn't hold on to it if you wanted to. And there was something about trying to grab it, trying to understand, that he made you stretch as a person and as a being, as a man, to wrestle with stuff. He wouldn't spoon feed you things. He made you wrestle, made you fight for your own realization. It's just a tone set. It was a total tone. It was like hearing a certain kind of music. As a person, you had the quality, this man is a type of music in the world. And I had never, so he's artful, he's brilliant, he's strong, he's powerful, he's undeniable. He is everything that he writes about. He struggled with this stuff. You could feel it. It wasn't an intellectual exercise. He's turned this over for decades and decades. And there was just a force of life that moved through him. And I got to hear bigger things speak through him. And there was a real feeling of like treasure. And for me, it was like, oh God, like, could I ever be that? Could I ever become that life-giving as a man? Would it take me? I mean, it was important for me to remember that Robert didn't write Iron John until he was later in life. He was in his 60s. You know? And then a lot of that teaching ensued after that. Like it took him a lifetime of translating world poetry and deconstructing images and myths to become the person that could lead that kind of thing, and really gave his biggest gifts in the last quarter of his life. Yeah.
Which I think, can make sense now, perhaps. Did that make sense to you at the time?
It did and didn't. I just didn't know what it meant for me now. Like, how do I get on the path that he's on? Am I always going to be imitating Robert Bly, or am I going to ever find my own style of music? Like this? Am I going to be as relevant to the generations that follow me as he was to me?
Did you ever ask those kinds of questions to him?
I did, not to him. He wouldn't have indulged that much. He'd just be like, like, fuck it, keep struggling with it. Like he would
I figured it might be something
he really
like
just made you. He'd be like, get out of your head and go play some music. Or write something.
I can see the wisdom that sits there when confronted with a question like that would make sense as well. Like, of course you're asking that question. So can you explain for us? Sure. Oh, where you go? Sorry.
Go for it.
No, well, like we're talking about Robert here and Iron John.
Yeah.
In your words, how would you perhaps sum up what Iron John is?
Iron John is a voice of someone in our age who heard the core music of many ages. In my music, I'm using that metaphorically. He's someone in our age who can open up your consciousness and being, mind and spirit, to things that our culture knows very little about, that ought not be lost. And things would probably be a lot better if we remembered and embodied. And so that's kind of what he is and was to me.
I love that description. And that music, right? And a lot of that in the form of myth, story, imagery, etc. I'm interested to get your take on it then. Where do you see myth, storytelling, the history of storytelling throughout cultures and humanity coming into play for us modern humans, and certainly in our context, men, right, in the form of Iron John at the very least? in terms of like, okay, kind of practical application, for lack of a better term, what do we do with that? Where is that? As you
Sure.
said, we could do with,
Sure.
knowing some of this music.
Yeah, I'll indulge the doing question, which is
Please.
myth will require you to go beyond your mind. It will require you to go into many different dimensions of your fullness as a person. To engage with myth requires you to be more full than you are today and more dynamic than you are today. If you really get in the ring with it, it will force you to become, I think, more whole, more expanded, more complete, if I can use that kind of word, more trustable, more connected to what is really life-giving. And it'll take you, every culture and every age, the mass, anything is rarely the living place of wisdom. We haven't figured out how to do that fully as humans yet. And so myth will require you to get in touch with the ancient part of you. And it's a lifelong journey. It's a deep, it's a way of life. It's practice. You can't ever contain it. It's always trying to go into different, once your mind feels like it has a peace, your heart will be befuddled and your spirit's in a knot. And so it requires us to become a lot wilder and more untamed and have more direct revelation. And so I hope that there's a renaissance of this stuff. I hope that you can tell how hungry people are for story, with how much there is in TV and movies and all that kind of stuff. But there's better, I don't want to say, there's other kinds of stories that'll do more to you, to listen to and tell and be a part of. And so.
Yeah. And I suppose I was just thinking, we're clearly keen for stories, right? Even our, some of our devices and the apps that we use, just label them stories up front, but they're not necessarily, these kinds of stories. But at the same time, you kind of reference TV and movies. I mean, like a lot of these things that we do watch are borrowing from some version of, a foundational story or archetype that we connect to. Hence why we connect to the story that we're seeing, even though it might be, covered in spandex and, other worlds and all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, well said. Well said. Yeah. But that gives me hope, that our desire for story is innate. And the question will be how hungry is the average person for a story that does what a myth does? Because I think it's a bit, our modern stories are a bit like sugar. We've become like, it's a real thing. It's a real draw. Like, it might take some time to change your appetite for something that has a different nutritional makeup in the form of story. And so I think we'll see a renaissance of it.
Yeah.
Of myth telling.
Yeah. And I'm getting the when you say the sugar, I'm getting the idea of the medicine, right? And we talk about, a spoonful of sugar. Well, the medicine's important, right? But obviously, not obviously, a lot of the time we've lost the medicine and just kept the sugar.
Exactly.
So then where does this kind of bring you now? Like in your work as a therapist, as a guide, does the likes of myth come in to how you
It does.
work with
It
people?
does.
Yeah.
I'm going to be going, Traver and I actually are both going to go to a storytelling school this summer with Martin Shaw over in England. And so that'll be a leaning into that side of things. I noticed, like, when I was younger, and it's still pretty bad, like, if I tell a story, I tried to tell it like Martin did, or like Michael Mead did, or Robert did.
Right.
And I didn't have a whole lot more than imitation. And I think I'm just starting to get to a place where I might be able to do the stories better justice, and find my own voice a little bit more. And so there is a shift. I mean, I'm a therapist. I meet with people one-on-one. I do men's retreats. I work with a number of other folks in collaborating, but I do think that the stories are going to come in a bit more, just because it's time for, I can feel my own pull to have that move through me.
Very nice. Look forward to witnessing that.
Thanks,
and I think probably makes a lot of sense, right? In terms of, to your point earlier, modeling, perhaps what might come from modeling initially is a form of imitation, right? Like, what else can I do? That's kind of, an extension of modeling. But then maybe there's this pull in you, which I can feel myself as well, where like, cool, but I want to be there over here.
Yeah.
And so how do I move past the imitation to really finding my own style?
Totally.
Right.
You have to imitate. I mean, it's in everything. It's in, like in music, it's easy to see. You learn a Jimi Hendrix song, but then through doing that, you find your own style eventually.
Yeah. So then, you obviously therapy and, working in retreats in different settings. Certainly, I know, you do a lot of work with Traver. I'm interested to get your take on this. And that is like, how would you kind of explain perhaps maybe some of the differences between, like therapy and obviously there's so many different forms. So I know I'm kind of bastardizing it a little bit, right? From even just from sitting in a one-on-one setting in a room to the wilderness. And then like, let's say something that's maybe a retreat where, there's kind of coaching and different types of facilitation going on. People might find a coach, they might go to a therapist. For you, sounds like you kind of, have breadth where you, can step into different areas and avenues. How do you kind of view that? How would you explain that for us?
There's like clearly a limit to the kind of personal growth and healing that happens in a therapist or coach's one-on-one settings. At some point, there has to be a group field and a group dynamic in a bunch of different nervous systems to heal things, to have certain things come up. And I feel like group space is, we've had such a renaissance of individual healing work of all different kinds and qualities. And it's starting to happen more in groups, but a lot of what happens is still individual work while together. Like if you think of a plant medicine ceremony, people are really doing a lot of their own work while we're with each other. And that's important and brilliant too. And at some point, the community space done for healing work is just what has to happen. And people that really model those types of contact and connection in the we space. And so that's what we're trying to do in the retreat. So the difference really is the bigness of the energies that can come up are very different.
Right.
Like a certain level of grief or anger or rage or fear or resentment or sadness, power, passion, more of that can come through when you're in a group space. All kinds of like really intense developmental pieces that need human contact, touch,
Right.
Presence, time, that comes through in the retreat space. Modeling comes through in the group space. You get to model what pseudo community feels like, so that when you go home, you can hopefully weave together something that is a little bit closer to a cohesive community. If you don't have that. But those are some of the differences, is the types of issues, the relational nature of them, the energetic dimensions. And so that's what I see being like the kind of toggle switch between the retreats and the one-on-one work.
And so there's, what I'm picking up on that as well is there's, I suppose, warrant in both, right, in terms of like the one-on-one work that can be done, but then there's also going to be a limit, and there needs this group environment.
100%. 100%.
And so for you personally, you've clearly been around certain situations. I mean, just looking back at your early 20s, going to some of these conferences and so on. But now, as a practitioner and a therapist in in running and facilitating those, is that something that you still place yourself into as not necessarily a participant, but in terms of, the power of like, okay, working on my own, journey through life and the environment around me and the community and that kind of group aspect?
So the question is around like my own, like how do I keep doing my own work, or do I see
Yeah,
myself
and in terms of also the group environment.
Yeah. So there's I am always continuing to learn. There's a couple of different places that I still train, where I get to be a part of a group field that I'm not facilitating and leading. And I get to be mentored, I get to be worked with, I get people to meet me in my edges, and work with me directly on my healing. And so that's important to me, that I have a variety of different places that are taking me into those zones and trying to drop me down into those realms. And it's only expanding. I'm only getting like more of them, just as I kind of need that to be met in the different dynamic places where I exist. Um, and so, yeah, anything from individual, my own therapy work, to group work I'm doing. I don't do as much of my own group somatic work in the way that I facilitate people,
Right.
but
Yep.
it's kind of in the works. I have a friend who's trying to organize that space for where are the places that the facilitators go to get facilitated. And so I'm on board when that space is opened up.
Yeah, very nice. And like personally interested, but I think also so valuable for people to hear that it's never just, especially given all the context of what you're talking about, it's never just this thing that I am then teaching, but it's like it's almost a way of life, which sounds like perhaps a cliched statement, but in terms of like being in it. And I'm also getting on some level like a version of parallels, but definitely quite stark differences to the start of your story, which was like there was this set of paradigms and boxes that wasn't working for me and I wasn't feeling met in. And now there's this version where it's like there's different things, but I'm feeling very met there. Is that accurate?
It is. It is. It is. Certainly in a lot of the therapeutic realms, in a lot of energetic realms. I mean, there's still certain spiritual places that are hard for me to find to be met. Who knows why? But in terms of like personal relational healing, in terms of community building, in terms of trying to usher in a different paradigm, I do think that there are a lot of places that I've found and helped to create.
And I have heard similar-ish stories in terms of like a religious upbringing and then some sort of like this isn't for me, it's not landing, there's a disconnect here and a separation. But of course there's different versions of that, which is perhaps the family environment and how we are as a family and what we do, and kind of that's not really fitting for me now. So I'm interested to ask you, how does your relationship go to that kind of box, that paradigm now? And do you see this as something that's quite common, certainly in men, when it comes to like the separation from who I am because of my family, and then like, oh, but who am I?
For sure. For sure. I think there's that's absolutely an archetypal pattern that you see. And I think it's a baseline for understanding how we're made and the reality inside us and outside of us that we arrive in as adults, and then how to recreate communities that really help us to find our core essence. And so that certainly you see that in a strong religious upbringing, people like having that same level of hunger for a certain kind of meaning and structure and connectivity. And to a large degree, like psychotherapy is almost like an outlet for our modern search for a spiritual inquiry. If we don't have like a bigger thing to connect to that's really clear to us, we always have ourselves. And so like it makes sense to go inside. It makes sense to understand what's happening inside you. And so it's causing a whole bunch of problems, but hopefully it's solving a bunch of them and creating a new. We're in process. Have faith in the long run.
Yeah, and you've used that term a couple of times as well, so I'm interested to explore it, to have faith, right? Because I imagine that alone has taken quite a journey from perhaps your initial upbringing, the idea of having faith, to how it now lands and has application for you.
Yeah, if you really dug at me, I think on a deep level, I try not to feel into, well, I guess, when people say faith, that can mean like a belief that things are going
Hmm.
to be a certain way, or like a hope, or like an optimism. Like, I think this will happen. I have faith this will happen.
Mm.
To me, it's different. Faith is for what I am now. I don't necessarily believe it's going to turn out great in all of these ways that I hope it will. Uh, but what faith is it's my job as a being to do my best job to create, um, and usher in a reality that I can stand by and stand in, no matter what's happening. Um, and so that is like a certain type of faith. There's
Mm.
like it's not, I wouldn't claim that it's self-sourced, but in a way it is. Like, I don't
Hmm.
need to know. I would love to believe that it turns out great. I don't know if it does on many of the ways that are important, but
Yeah.
I still live and create in a way that makes my best attempt at that happening.
Yeah, I like that. And, I think, as you said, self-sourced maybe. There's this, I think, what I'm hearing in that as well is this level of, for lack of a different term, perhaps, trust in self as well. I can navigate regardless. Oh, did I lose you there for a moment? Have I got you?
Inside.
Oh,
Did it cut out there?
yeah, it did.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure, I'll say
Sorry.
again. Um,
I had said, what I'm hearing,
uh-huh.
to summarize it, is also this kind of idea almost of like a lot of trust in self, regardless of self-sourcing. There's this element of like,
Yes.
I'll be able to navigate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only response I have to that is that the way that I mean it when I say trust in self is that there are certain things that are bigger than me, but
Mm.
I've let them and helped them take up residence inside me. When I say self-trust, it does
Hmm.
mean trust in things bigger and beyond me, but there are things that have taken up residence inside. And this is sort of like the domain where I steward a certain kind of relationship to them. So when I trust myself,
Mm.
trusting the things that I've allied myself with.
Mm.
Um, so it's self and not self at the same time.
Yeah. I like it. And again, what I'm seeing, perhaps a glimpse of there is this depth of learning and embodiment, and
Mm.
also history when it comes to the idea of mythology and what you've learned and started to absorb. And as you said, from 21 to now, there's a depth of like even just understanding the world of Iron John, etc. um I'm looking at the time now, so I know
Sure.
we need to get wrapping up, and I'm absolutely loving this, and the places I'm sure we could go. A question that I've got that I like to ask, certainly men that are in the form of working with men at the very least, and that is, yeah, I think you've probably addressed this in parts, but I'm going to ask it explicitly, and that is, how would you say that you have personally benefited from having good men in your life? Men who see you, who keep you honest, who challenge you and support you.
It almost like put tears in my eyes. It's the reason I'm alive, literally, many times over. Um, it's such a gift to be nourished by other men, to know that your life depends on other people. That's kind of a gift, um, and a teaching in and of itself. And how am I different? I feel like the essence of all those other men are partly woven in through me, like their generosity of their heart and their spirit and their mind, um, have made my life richer, my relationships deeper, um, the things that occupy my inner world more substantive, um, and of more consequence. I don't have, I'm not as and it's still evolving.
Mm.
Um, but it's been everything. It's been everything, and continues to be. Like, we need each other so much, and it's relieving to just finally give into that and live with that as a truth.
Yeah, I feel that. Thank you so much for that answer, Michael. So there's clearly many things that you do and have done. And of course, weaving through all of that is who you are, who you choose to be. If people want to find out a little bit more about Michael, obviously we can put links and stuff like that in, but are there ways that people can engage and work with you?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the website's probably the best. Just my website, michaelgaycounseling.com. There's just like a bit of a write-up about my philosophical approach to the work and other podcasts like this one, and a link to events that I'm a part of. And so just stay plugged in that way. There'll be more unfolding quite a bit in the coming years, but for now, that website's probably the best way to get in touch.
Beautiful.
Great, man.
Michael Gay, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're absolute legend.
Thank you so much.